later. The video will be posted to our website. And, you know, just while I mentioned that, you can also go to our website to get links to past videos from past events. So please take advantage of that. Couple of housekeeping items, though, just so that everyone knows. We're going to ask everyone to stop their video and turn off their audio. So if you hover your cursor over the bottom of your screen, a menu should pop up. And there you see a yellow arrow that's pointing to the icons where you can stop your video or stop your audio. So we would ask that you do that. The other thing is there'll be a question and answer period at the end, and you can submit questions in the chat box. So you see that yellow arrow again in that menu that's at the bottom. If you click on that, you'll be able to type a message in. So that's how we'll handle the chat questions. Okay, so for those who don't know me, my name is Joan Lawler, and I'm currently the president of the Quanticontog Historical Society. We're very fortunate tonight to have Markham Starr. Unfortunately, he will be delayed because he's had some family issues, but he should be with us in a few minutes. But the program starts off with a video that Mark had done on Point Judith. So we're going to start with that video. One of the things I just asked, if you are having any problems with the video, you know, it may be your connection, your internet connection. What we've put in the chat box, if you open up the chat box, you'll see a link directly to the Vimeo video that Mark had prepared. So if you're having any issues at all, please use that link, and that would get you started into the video. And then obviously come back at the end and we'll have a discussion with Mark as well as a Q&A session. Mark, we asked him to come back to talk about this. He's a documentary photographer, and he focuses his work on the working cultures of New England. So he's done photographs, and he's written dozens of books, and he focuses on things like the commercial fisherman industry, dairy farmers, the U.S. Coast Guard, and Connecticut historic barns. So he's been featured in numerous publications, and his work is featured and included in the permanent collections in museums across New England. So as I said, we're going to be talking to Mark later, but we're going to start off with the video.
fishing port located in Narragansett, Rhode Island. It houses a robust and the state's largest commercial fishing fleet here. And it's a very diverse fleet made up of scallopers, lobster boats, draggers, rod and reel boats, gill netters, and everything in between. There are tourism components to the port. There are intermodal transportation and ferry services here. There is a very popularly used public boat launch, and as well as a public beach located here. There's a handful of seafood restaurants and gift shops. It's a little bit for everything, but primarily it's a commercial fishing port. Historically, this has always been a mixed species port. At one time, really concentrating on butterfish. Currently, no question, concentrating on loligo squid. We are the squid capital of the world. Basically, Rhode Island has more squid landings than all of the other East Coast states combined. It's a mainstay fishery here in this port, and it supplies calamari internationally as well as domestically, and from many, many fishermen, and providing a lot of economic benefit to the state as far as processing is concerned, and fishing jobs and things like that. We also have a lot of other different fisheries here. Like I said, we're very diverse. It's a lot of differences from New Bedford, for example, where they're pretty much ground fish and scallops. That's really what they have, but we have everything in between. Right now in the winter time, you have offshore lobster boats working on Jonah crab. In the spring and summer, you'll have scallopers transiting this port from anywhere as far as South Carolina, landing here and making Galilee or Point Judith their temporary home for a couple of weeks or a couple of trips. We have a really strong and historical inshore lobster fleet made up of, boats anywhere from 30 to 50 feet that, are working on a daily basis in Rhode Island state waters and in federal waters. We have some small gill netters, day boat scallopers, that are working scallops but returning every evening. Lobster has always been a very steady producer here as far as economic value to this port. But mostly we do loligo squid, which is our mainstay fishery.
My grandmother was born in Point Judith Lighthouse, 1896, I believe. His father and grandfather were lighthouse keepers from like the 1860s to the early part of the 1900s. He had two brothers. One became a boat builder, and the other worked up in town at the mills, as far as I know. But he became a fisherman out of Galilee. And he had 3 sons and 2 daughters, and my mother was one of his daughters. His 3 sons all fished. My Uncle Howard, Walter, who's known as Babe, and my Uncle Joe. And there were 5 boys in the next generation. And a couple of the other ones actually did continue in the business, but they both left it. And I'm the last one left in the business after all these years. I started fishing with my grandfather as a very young, maybe 8 or 10 years old. I'd go out with him when we went to school on the weekends. My cousin Jimmy, who was Babe's son, and I would go whenever we could, whenever they'd allow us to go, because we pretty much just gotten away, I think. They made us sit up in the dorio for most of the day or up on the bow to stay out of the way, because we were just little kids. He didn't have a radar when we went with him. He would be listening all the time for the tugs and ships going through, and they had to look out for each other, so you always listening for a horn. One day as a little kid, I was sitting on the bow, we always had a bottle of soda, and I took the soda and I kind of blew in it like we always did. Went ooh, like that. My grandpa, he jumped up, he's looking all around like that. Oh no, but he was right on his toes. My grandfather, his was a day boat, and Uncle Joe, they would come and go every day, and be in the afternoon, and when we got out of school, we would hitchhike down to the docks and we'd help them unload their fish. All the kids that were in school would be down there, and we get $1 a thousand for helping unload the boats. Now I think it's up to $10 a thousand, but it was a lot of work for a young kid. But there was a pretty good crowd of young kids down there, and a lot of them are still there, 50 years later. A lot of the different fishermen had their shacks right on the bulkhead. Between Champlin Seafood and the original co-op, there were probably 5 or 6 shacks there. My grandfather had his. The Champlins had a couple of them. The Westcotts had shacks, and that's where they kept their gear. Now the kind of gear we have now, you'd fill it up in no time. There's not enough room for the gear we have now. And that's kind of where we could hang out in the weather. we could go into we call it the shed, and wait for the boats to come in. And sometimes, if we had to be there early in the morning and couldn't hitchhike down, we could actually stay in the sheds overnight and get up and go fishing in the morning. They just loved to fish. I think my grandfather's record was 85 days in a row or something like that. They'd get up in the morning, go down, throw the lines off and go in the summer. But in the winter they didn't get this much time in, and not even close, but they took advantage of the good weather and would never miss a good day. So you pretty much had to go every day to make it pay, and that little 45-foot boat would have 4 men on it. And us 2 little kids up in a dory. And they were all kept busy. They used to cut the heads off of whiting, all the whiting that they caught, and there was a lot of whiting on the beach back then. We don't see it anymore. But in order to get a better price, they cut the head off every one of them. So they needed the extra help to make it work and still get 5 or 6 cents a pound if they cut the head and guts out of it. So, but back then that was what they did. And they all did okay at it. Some did better than others, depending on how hard you wanted to go and how good a fisherman you were. It was a great place to grow up back then. There was always something to do. Back then the families were very close, the fishing families. A lot of them lived right down there. We still managed to get in trouble, but we never got into big trouble because there was always somebody keeping an eye on us, because they all knew who we were. A great place to grow up. Back when I was a kid, there was so much opportunity to learn. Maybe because we were a lot of families there. I learned so much from the guys just hanging around the docks, and the guys you did fish with. They liked to teach. They seemed to want to make a good fisherman out of you, And if you paid attention to them, you could learn a lot. And even later on a windy day, everybody's sitting in the bar room telling stories, and you could go in and talk to these guys, some of the captains, and they were great. The opportunity to learn was there. And a lot of us took the opportunity, because the progression back then was you would get a job on a boat. You would pay attention and save your money and hope to get your own boat someday. And you would buy the boat from one of the guys, and he would probably buy a better one, a bigger one maybe, or he would retire. but there was always somebody coming up behind, you know, each generation there was somebody coming up behind them. I don't regret one bit of it. Glad I got the opportunity. But it's almost over. 2 more yet, I think. But we'll see.
My mother said, you can go wait in your room for your father to come home. I did. He wasn't pleased with me. You didn't know why? I didn't know
I've never been on a boat as far as fishing goes. You know, I've been on plenty of boats, but never been fishing. That just wasn't my thing. Never really got into it, which, you know, I love working down here, and I love meeting all the fishermen and dealing with that side of the business. But what they do out there is tough work, and it just wasn't for me. I was born in Norwich, Connecticut, but I was raised from first grade in North Kingstown, Rhode Island. Went to high school there, lived there until right before going to college. You know, I wasn't like your average person down here that spent hours on a skiff. I love the water, I love being down by the beach, but I never really got into fishing. And my dad, kind of later in life, invested in this Narragansett Bay lobster, and that's how I got into it. You know, it's just a part-time job and then eventually full-time. I started in '94, so I've been here over 20 years now. Pretty much started as a driver, you know, making $6 an hour, and I lived on Great Island at a seasonal rental, and started from there and kind of worked my way up to where, you know, running it now. But as soon as we opened up, 90s hit. The 90s were a lot of lobsters, thousands of pounds. The inshore boats were catching 1,500 pounds at some point, some of the bigger ones, per day. The offshore guys were catching anywhere from 5,000 to 15,000 pounds per week, per boat, and we got big fast. You know, we had a lot of lobsters moving through this small little building we have here. And that's kind of how we grew to where we were in the late 90s, before it kind of crashed. And after 2001, traps were decreased. The number of traps that were allowed in the water per boat were decreased. And, you know, from there, the catch just kept going down inshore. The older people got out of the business, and the younger guys just weren't making enough money. And now it's just where it is now, where it's a very it's kind of small industry in the inshore fishing in Rhode Island. What we had to do here is we had to diversify. I mean, in the early 2000s, if we decided to stay lobsters, we would be out of business and I'd be doing something else. But that's kind of how we got to where we are today, full-line seafood. Lobsters is about 25% of our business now, and we do a full-line seafood from clams, little necks, you know, oysters, to finfish and swordfish, all that stuff. We do it all, and we deliver to markets and restaurants, well, all throughout Rhode Island and Connecticut. That's the only way we would have survived. Otherwise, we'd be doing something else, without a doubt. About 8 years ago, we got into the fish business. We heard about a company that was going out of business. They were looking to, the owner was looking to sell, and he wanted to sell everything. And we bought the business, and we started selling fish. We have dayboat fluke guys coming in, and black sea bass guys, and striper guys, and we're able to buy from draggers right on our dock, as opposed to just going to the Bedfords and Bostons and buying all your fish there and not always knowing what you're getting. It's nice having a fisherman that we can buy from, talk to them, and kind of learn the business that way. I think that makes us a little different than what other people do. You know, I would say back in the 90s, 80s, 70s, we'd have hundreds of fish cutters around. You know, we're dwindled down to maybe a handful of people that even know how to cut fish. It's hard to find that. It's just not as necessary anymore. There's a lot more machines that do it. No, regulations are real difficult for the fishermen, and that makes it difficult for everybody in the industry. I mean, we're buying whole fish sometimes for $6+ a pound for a fish that yields 30 or 40%. So yeah, regulations have been tough, and it's what makes this business really difficult. The future of fishing is kind of scary right now, so I don't know if a lot of young guys are saying to themselves, I'm going to work in this business, work hard, and make this my life. I see a lot more just transient people coming through here. That's the biggest change, I think. And, you know, less fishermen. Definitely a lot less fishermen. But we still think it's important to be here, you know, have a foot in Point Judith and be part of the fishing community and not move to some off-location spot that'll be a lot cheaper for us. Just having a foot here and where everything started in Rhode Island and being local, part of the local movement of product. No farm, no food, no fishermen, no food. We want to be part of that. There's a lot of Point Judiths throughout the country. You know, we get rid of this one and then the next one goes and the next one goes, and this is where food comes from. It's fresh from the ocean. It gives people jobs. I just can't imagine having no fishing industry in our state. I mean, this is Rhode Island, the ocean state, and it's really important.
In Wakefield, but spent a lot of time in Point Judith. A lot of times it was the only time to actually see my dad, especially in the lobster season. You know, I remember when we were little kids, my mom would get us up at 10 or 11 at night, and we'd come down to the co-op when it had a lobster department, and in the summer that was like the only time we could see our dad, because he was just going, working. My grandparents started a bait shop down in Point Judith in the 40s. It was back on the bulkhead where Rhode Island Engine is in the corner now, and they used to rent skiffs out. You know, people would come and rent skiffs and buy bait and tackle, and it was a pretty popular thing for people. My father was a lobsterman, turned scalloper, now retired. My brother was a lobsterman, drags now. The first time I lobstered, I actually lobstered with my brother. I worked for him for a couple seasons, and then I went with my dad for a season or two, and then I started working on land and fish markets, and then I started dragging. You know, the most that I can think of is probably 4 or 5 women that have fished out of Point Judith. I'm not too sure about any of the other ports, but 4 or 5 I think is, you know, the top number. From a woman's perspective, sometimes you feel like you have to work twice as hard as the guy standing next to you, because people think, oh, you know, she's just a girl, she can't pull her weight or whatever, and then, but when you finally get recognized for being able to do what you can do, actually, it got a lot easier after that. I really don't see that, you know, other than sometimes I'm not as strong as the guys are, but I think I've been doing it long enough where I know what I'm doing, and I know what needs to be done. I think I carry my own weight. You know, when I was little, and my mom would bring us down to see my dad unloading at the co-op, the original co-op, Galilee Grocery was right across the street. And that's where all the boats would go to get their grub. Up above was Wilcox Marine, so you'd get all your supplies there. You'd go across the street, you'd get all your groceries. Everything was, you know, right there. Now it seems it's more tourist shops and just kind of a gateway for people to go to Block Island. It seems like it's gotten way away from the industry port that it was, that I remember growing up as a little kid, anyway. First big boat that I went fishing on was the Lena Pearl. We were squid fishing at the time. I think it was, maybe 4 or 5 day trips. Either go to like Hudson Canyon or off in Nantucket. I think we might have been off in Nantucket because I'm pretty sure it was in the summer. When you're on a squid trip at Hudson Canyon, you usually fish around the clock. If the squid lift up at night, you can just jump outside a little bit and try for whiting. So a lot of times, like when you're fishing in the canyons for squid, you're going around the clock. So then, different crew members will hold different tows, like usually the captain will tow all day and then split it up between the crew members at night. The captain will get a couple hours here and then get up and haul back, and once you get the fish put down, then he'll go lay down again for maybe another hour or 2 hours while someone else holds the tow. If you're already there, you get up probably 15 minutes before sunrise, set the net in. Some boats require breakfast, others don't. So if you're on a boat that does require breakfast, then you got to make breakfast after you set in. Usually tow for a couple hours, haul back, get the deck all picked up, process the fish, put it down in the fish hole, and then, usually by that time, depending on how much you have, you might have a half hour, you might have 40 minutes. You might not even finish picking up before you have to haul back again. It all depends, and you do this probably between 4 and 6 times a day. Later on in the afternoon, you have to think about what you're making for dinner. Try to get that put together. Not every day is a soup day or a spaghetti day, or you gotta kind of say, hey Cap, what's the weather gonna be like for tomorrow, because I'm planning on making a spaghetti sauce or a boiled dinner, or so you gotta tie stuff on the top of the stove a lot of times, because you're usually out on deck working while you've got stuff inside cooking, and sometimes you come in and it's all over the floor, and usually you get lucky and you contain it enough, but hopefully before 9 o'clock at night we can have dinner. Sometimes you eat at 9, sometimes you eat at 6, sometimes you eat at midnight, sometimes you don't eat at all. It all depends on what you're fishing for and how your day's going. It's definitely not a Rachel Ray 30-minute deal. When I first started, going four-handed was kind of the norm. So, some of the bigger boats, depending on what you were doing, were even going 5-handed. But now most of the boats go 3-handed. We're not allowed to keep enough to warrant taking an extra person, Certain days, certain things that you're fishing for, you have to work a little harder because you don't have the extra guy, but it's more money in our pockets also when we can make it. I think it gives me a lot of peace. I think it gives me a lot of independence. It gives me a lot of time to do what I want to do as far as time off. It gives me the opportunity, I would say, to see things that most people will never see in their lifetime. Not everyone gets to see the sun rise and the sun set over the water every day. I'm a commercial fisherman. Some people do say, oh, she's a fisherwoman, and I'm like, no, I'm a commercial fisherman. Just like the guy standing next to me.
I grew up in Baltimore, Maryland, and as far from a fishing family as you can get. My dad was a professor of economics and head of the business department at Loyola of Maryland, and I had no connection to the ocean at all except for summer trips down to the shoreline in Maryland, so I did not come from a fishing family at all. A couple of friends of mine from college were living in Rhode Island and had their feet started in the fishing industry, so I came up to visit them and not intending to stay. And that was in 1974, I guess, or somewhere right around there, and I'm still here. But it was totally by accident that I ended up here and ended up staying. I never intended to start fishing. I needed a part-time job. Everybody else I was living with had jobs connected in one way or another with the fishing industry. I got a job at the Point Judith co-op unloading day boats in the afternoon, helping to box and ice the fish. I had made it through my first Point Judith winter. And by then I was attracted to the area. I had grown up in a city. It's hard to think of this area as rural now, but back then in the winter, to me it was winter rural. It was isolated and stark and beautiful, and I really was attracted to that. That following spring I met a few guys who were, one of them had a job on a dragger, but he was taking the summer off, and he had a skiff and he had some lobster pots, and they set him around the breakwater, hauled them by hand. And I'd go out with them on occasion and see what they did, and I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting. You didn't need much. I had about $1,000, and with that you get a skiff and an outboard and 50 lobster pots. I thought, well, maybe I can make as much doing it as I could unloading boats at the co-op, so that's how I got started. It was kind of on a whimsy. I had a skiff for a couple of years around the breakwater, and then I had a little 22-footer for a couple of years. So that had been 4 years, and I still was never intending to become a fisherman. It was just something that happened. I think what you do shapes you gradually over time, and you become who you are. It suited me. I liked the elemental nature of it. That's what attracts me to fishing. I mean, fishing's a throwback. It's a throwback to the way things used to be done. Things haven't changed all that much. It's a very elemental job, especially lobstering. I mean, you think about it, you're baiting a trap to catch a wild animal, and you're providing food for people. And you always have to know the weather. The weather is always on your mind. So those things right from the start attracted me. Most of my gear is deployed in a range of 14 to 35 miles from shore. So depending on where we're going, it might depend on what time we leave the dock. But we're a day boat, we're home every night. That's part of what attracted me. I always knew I wanted a family. I always knew I wanted children. And it's tough enough, as everybody knows, to stay married and have kids and to raise them. And you add the burden of being offshore, an offshore fisherman. I didn't think it would work, and I decided that if I could avoid that there was a chance for me to adopt this, what to me was an alien lifestyle at the time. But I could see that the guys going out for 4 or 5, 6 days at a time, I knew that I couldn't do it. It wasn't suited for me. So we're home every night, and we might leave the dock at 5 o'clock in the morning on average, and we'll just drive out to the gear, which might be an hour and a half out, or it might be 3.5 hours out. Usually it's in between that. And we'll haul, especially now at my age, not too furiously, but we'll work pretty steadily for just 5 or 6 or 7 hours, and then come home. On average, we're dock to dock. On average, we're 11 or 12 hours a day. Some of the days are longer than that. That's about it, 11, 12 hours, which doesn't seem like a long day. But that's a typical day. And then there's always work to do at the dock. There's bait to deal with. There's boat maintenance to deal with. We retail a certain percentage of our lobsters at the dock. There's that to deal with. And we fish, on average, about 120 I average about 105 days a year. It's a gear-intensive fishery. You're always working on the doggone things. If you have nothing better to do any day in your life, you can be in your workshop working on old gear. So there's probably a couple of days' work on land for every day you're out on the ocean. So it's not like you're only working 105 days a year.
Hey, I gotta pee.
When I first started, there were more young people, for sure, in the fishery. There were more young people my age. So there was more sense of community, or maybe it was just a sense of partying. I don't know what it was. As you get older and people get married, your focus tends to turn to your life away from fishing. And I mean, to me, that's the key to fishing, is to have a happy home life. If you have a happy home life, whatever that may be, it doesn't have to be the prototypical wife and 3 kids or something like that. But whatever your home life is, if you have a stable, happy home life, then you can enjoy your vocation, whatever it is, a lot more. If you're just trying to get all your satisfaction out of fishing, and you're not happy when you hit land, then that's a problem. So I think as everyone got older and got into families, I think there's less sense of community. You know, I used to know everyone down there. I know all the guys that had draggers, and now I don't know. Now I hardly know. The kid that works for me will say, "Do you know who owns that boat?" No, I go, "No, I don't." And I used to know everybody down there, and they probably don't know me either. I was a guy with that green lobster boat. Maybe it's a little bit more fragmented, but I think that's just because we've all gotten older. Once you have the kids waiting for you at home, you tie up the boat, you go home. There are fewer and fewer younger people getting into it with good reason. I mean, they can look at the economics of it. Plus, maybe they've listened, to some of the things we've told them. It's a tough way to make a living. There's no safety net. There are a lot of interesting things to do. Fishing's one of them, but there are a lot of interesting things to do. And it's not an easy road. And it is hard to get young people to commit to that kind of gritty lifestyle. I'm not sure what the future of lobster fishing is in Point Judith. The Area 3 boats seem to be more stable than the Area 2 boats. In the Area 2 boats, there's so few left. The way the regulations are, there's never going to be an influx of boats like we had before, because there are just not enough permits to allow it. I have no idea what the future holds for fishing. I'm happy to still be doing it at my age. I figured I'd be retired a long time ago from this business, and I'm still doing it. So whether or not I would get into fishing again, knowing everything I know now, the one side of me would say, well, of course not, because I could have made, 100-fold the money I made fishing, doing what I was, I'm going to put this in quotation marks, supposed to have done with my education and all that. But the other side of me says, what attracted me to fishing is that it is a throwback to the way things used to be done. And we live in such a data-driven, computerized, analytical, tabulated world now that fishing gets you away from that. So I consider myself to be happy 99% of the time. And I'm a really, really lucky guy. I'm very, very grateful for the life I've had. Feeling that, I'm not sure that I would want to have done something different. Because why would you mess with that? Why would you, take a chance and say, if I could go back to when I was 24 again and choose careers, why would I do something different? It's turned out so well, what I've done. So knowing what I know now, I hope I would have made the same choice.
Right.
was in college, I worked as a waitress during the year. And then I knew a lot of fishermen. I decided I wanted to go fishing. And I ended up fishing for 5.5 years out of Point Judith and a little bit out of New Bedford. And it was awesome. I loved it. I remember when I was first looking for a job down the point, I had some guy sit me on a reel of rope and tell me to go home and get married. I had other people saying, we don't hire girls on this boat, you know, and I was persistent enough, and, you know, maybe the boat that I did get on initially was not the best, but they did take me, and then things got better from there. I saw an ad in the paper for a job at Trawlworks, and I thought, well, I don't know a lot about mending. I'll come here and learn, and then I'll go back fishing again. And I came here in 1988, and I never left. So here I am almost 30 years later. It's actually kind of amusing. When I was in college, I took a class in net mending that was at the University of Rhode Island at the fisheries school, just for something different to do. And I ended up failing it, of all things. So there you go. It's kind of ironic. So we design, we build, and then when you tear it up, we'll repair it if you bring it back to us. Traditionally, nylon was the preferred material for the webbing that was in squid nets, and we used to carry a black twisted nylon, which we still do carry, but we don't use as often. Guys have moved to polyethylene, and now there are also these high tenacity polyethylene twines available on the market where you can use a really thin thread, but it's super strong, so it reduces the drag coefficient. If you have a lot of small mesh in your net and you're able to use like a 1.1 millimeter twine instead of a 2 mil or higher, then you can reduce your drag quite a bit, which means less fuel, less pressure on the engine, all kinds of things. You can move faster. You know, with squid, speed is really important. So when a guy comes in, we'll sit down with him and we'll ask him these questions. You know, are you rigged for dragging? What kind of horsepower do you have? What type of engine do you have in the boat? What's your gear reduction? Wheel size? What's your tow wire size? Because tow wire too, depending on the thickness or diameter of it, can add to the drag load of everything you're towing. And you know, how much ground cable do you pull? Those are the kind of questions we ask, and then they'll tell us what they're looking for exactly. And they're pretty specific. So generally we build to order, and you know, knock on wood, we've been able to stay busy enough. Once we develop a plan is almost like, I hate to compare it to this, but it's sort of like a dress pattern. So you have all the parts of the net are drawn out, and on those drawings will be the number of meshes wide of a piece, the depth, and then like the bellies are cut at an angle, almost like a triangle. And so there'll be what we call the taper on each side of the belly, and that's a pattern that you cut into the diamond webbing that makes it go from wide to narrow. So all that information is on our net plan, and then we go to the net plan to cut out the pieces that are on the plan. And then once you've cut all the pieces out, then you start to sew them together by hand. And then we hand knit a strengthening edge on the webbing called selvage, and that selvage is hung to a wire frame, and essentially the net is like a big funnel. It is wide in the front and then narrows down in the back. No, he has one on there now. Oh, does he? There's a lot of handwork. It's pretty time consuming. I don't know how long it was before I felt like I was competent to do everything that we do. It was quite a while. Bob likes to say that the nets are the honey that bring in, you know, the flies for everything else, because it's very labor intensive, so I don't think the net part of the business is the money-making part of the business at all. It's something that guys need to have, but in the grand scheme of things, because it's so labor intensive, it doesn't work out to be a great moneymaker. We still build traditional nets, but I would say that what regulations have done is that they've changed the mesh sizes that you're allowed to use. And then you have to carry so many different types of things because every fishery has its own thing. If you're whiting fishing up to 3,500 pounds, you can use a 4.5-inch cod end with a 2.5-inch liner. But then if you go to 7,500 pounds, you have to use a 2.5 or larger liner with a 6-inch cover bag. It just, you know, on and on it goes. So scup, you have to use a 5-inch bag. It's got to be 75 meshes deep. We carry 3-inch cod ends, 4.5-inch cod ends, 5-inch cod ends, 6-inch cod ends, 6.5-inch cod ends, 5.5-inch cod ends. So there's a whole variety of things for different fisheries that are required, and we stock them all. What Dave and I do is specifically fishery related, and if that goes away, then that's an issue. And I think it's a struggle all the time and more complicated than it ever was. And it really doesn't have to be that complicated. It's way more complicated than it needs to be. So.
I grew up in West Warwick, Rhode Island. My grandmother had a summer house down in Great Island. And, you know, we come down for the summers and stuff like that and spend, you know, a lot of time. And then I started surfing when I was like 14 years old. So I've been around the water all my life since I was, you know, like a kid. But I never got into the fishing industry till I was like 28 years old. The only kind of fishing I ever did was my skiff. I used to have a skiff and lobster on the seawall and along the beach and stuff, but I never did any commercial fishing on a drag or trawler. I have no desire. I did some construction work. I worked at a golf course one of my first jobs is working at a golf course. And then from construction, I met Kevin. Kevin said, let's go down to Point and I can get you some work down there. I went down there and I started getting work right off the get-go. And I didn't know anything about the fishing industry or lumping. And, you know, as soon as I went down there, I said, oh, this is the job for me. That's it. And I'll never look back. Lumping is a job of taking fish out of a fishing boat. When they catch the fish, they put them down the fish hold, which has separate pens. They put stuff in one pen, squid in another pen, whiting in another pen. So everything's separated and in different pens. And then you have to go down there and unload it. You know, it's just a matter of being there, being available, working hard. It's like any other job. If you show up every day, you can't help but get work. And that's the way it was. I just went down there every day and I was around a lot, available for work whenever there was work. And then I got, you know, my foot in the door down there. And then it's, you know, progressed by you getting a reputation with the captains, people liking you, your style of work, and then you get more and more jobs. That's one thing about lumping, it's very efficient. It's like not a lot of wasted movements. And that's what you try to avoid because, you know, you got sometimes, you know, 80, 90,000, 100,000 pounds of fish down load. You don't want to burn yourself out the first 10,000 pounds of fish and then, you know, you just won't be able to do it. So you have to pace yourself, use technique, don't get rambunctious, and one bucket after the other. That's the way I look at it. Don't look ahead, just go one bucket after another. When I started, there was, I say, somewhere between 11 to 15 lumpers but at the co-op, which was 4 doors. They ran 4 doors at that one takeout dock, and they had like boats. That's back when they had a lot of boats. I taught the guys who fished and they lump before they fish that they used to bunk school to go down and lump. because they wanted to make some money, and they just didn't go to school that day. They went down and split 100,000 pounds with somebody else from school, and they had spending money for the week. You know, I mean, that's the way it was back in the day. You know. The industry is really depleted as far as the amount of boats there are and the amount of weight the boats bring in. I say it was 1989. I logged up all the fish I lumped in that year, and it was like 6.3 million pounds. 6.3 million pounds of fish in 1989. And last year, I tallied up what I lumped, and I lumped 2.35 million pounds of fish. There's only like 4 or 5 lumpers down there now that work. Very seldom there's too much work for us. Most of the time, we're scrounging up for work now. Back when I first started lumping, 60, 70, 80,000 pounds was, was a common thing. Now if I have, a handful of days a year, I lump 60,000 pounds of fish in a day. That's a good day around here now, 60,000 pounds. But majority of the time, like I said, for you to have 365 days a year and only lump 2.3 million pounds of fish, you can divvy that up. You don't really lump a lot of fish per day anymore like you used to, And there was no contracts and nothing like that. It was all verbal agreements. That's why I like lumping, Take somebody for their word as opposed to having it in writing, and stuff. So for every 1,000 pounds of fish that you lump, you get paid a certain amount of money. It doesn't matter what kind of fish. I've never been hurt lumping where I couldn't work. I've been doing it for 32 years. It'll be 61 Thursday. I feel great, I don't know. I had shoulder problems, nothing like that I couldn't work with, you have to suck it up and work. So whether it's like maybe take an ibuprofen before you go to work, some of that, you do what you have to do, because you know that it might be a 3-week period where you're working like you're a madman, and then it's going to be slow again. So make the money while you can, suck it up, don't, think, I can't work tomorrow because of my shoulder. No, and that thought, that's my wife, that thought never crosses my mind. She said, you can't work tomorrow, and I say, I have to work tomorrow. I am going to work tomorrow, there's no question about it. I just do it. I love my job. I never seen another job like it. I just wish I started lumping when I was like 14 years old. That's what I wish, I'm never going to get another job. This is my job right here. I thought that the very first time I lumped, the very first day. I said, the lumping's a job for me. I'm just going to lump. And it's been good to me.
Fishing, I like to say by gravity. I grew up right here on the pond, the top of the pond above Stone Cove Marina, just up the hill. And it was just there, and couldn't really go far. Our neighborhood wasn't even really a neighborhood, so for me it was only natural to walk down the hill to the water. And I got to know everybody at the dock workers and everything, and watch all the skiffs get built. The one I have now is one that was, I remember when that one was built, back in '83. So, but yeah, so I like to say gravity. My family always was on the water. They were sailing, racing Point Judith 15s out of the Point Judith Yacht Club, which is at the top of the pond. We knew the Hoxie family, old Sammy, and Paul, Tommy's older brother at the time. My grandfather would give me a little sailboat. So I started out playing around in a rowboat and a little Beverly dinghy trying to get quahogs up pond. I'd actually sail down pond and sell them at Handrigan's, and then sail back up pond. That was before I had an outboard and a skiff. That was before I even needed a license. I remember getting finally, after about a year or so of that, I finally got reprimanded. What was that, 82? '83, I had to go get a license. Well, I did. And then I got a skiff. I got a couple bushels, really a couple buckets. I mean, I was mostly tonging, a little bit of bull raking. You know, again, being a kid, you're not setting the world afire. You're just trying to do things and learn things. And, you know, same thing with lobster and a few lobster pots. If I had enough money for a next tank of gas and go to Allen's and buy, you know, galley grocery and buy a couple of death dogs, as they were called, death dogs, and some potato salad for lunch, I was good to go. Maybe some Twinkies, you know, good enough for the next day. I mean, you're in high school, what do you care? You know, I'm thrilled to just have pocket money. So, always on the water with my family. I just kind of made a move to be a little more serious about it. So I thought it was a nice lifestyle. That was my freedom. I could get it. I couldn't have a car. I couldn't travel much, but I could get in a rowboat and catch blue crabs or something up pond, or a little eels or something, or go down pond a little ways further when I got a little older and dig quahogs. Then eventually I got a couple lobster pots. And my grandfather helped me buy I got an old skiff. He helped me buy a little outboard. Little loans like that, you know, which I paid back, but yeah, little loans, and culminating with my getting the Captain Robert, which is one reason why his name's on it. You know, I'd be lumping. I'd go down pond, be a lumper. That was great money. I paid my way through college, being a deckhand, lobstering and lumping. 5 years of college, and I never bothered graduating because at that point I had met Kevin Murphy. I was running he asked me to run his boat, the Lucy and Margaret, which is now the Martha Porter. And, you know, and I was just getting to know people. And then, you know, I got to know Bruce Loftus, and I ended up buying my first wooden Novi boat from him, the Nutcracker, which I used for lobster. And then, you know, being a kid, tried to do about anything else I could with an old wooden boat. Ideally, it seemed to me the progression was you work your way up, you go offshore, and then you slowly come back inshore and end up in a skiff again, you know? Like Pa Loftus, he's almost 90 years old with a eye patch on, still scratching quahogs. You know, I mean, why retire? Downsize a little bit. The port you see today, the port of Galley and Snug Harbor, tip of the pond there, it's the shadow of what it once was. I mean, I remember, you know, lobstering was going gangbusters. You had guys in skiffs. There's dozens of guys fishing the break wall. You know, pots everywhere. Harry Town, myself, Spud Neck. You know, Matt Fish used to have a bunch of pots out, but there was always a lot of buoys all around the break wall. Always. You know, it wasn't bad. I mean, as a kid in a skiff, I could go out and fill a small trash barrel with lobsters on a good haul. You know, that's not too terribly bad. So yeah, lobster boats. I mean, I think there used to be 50, 60 lobster boats. Maybe I almost want to say 70 or 80. But there was a lot of lobster boats in the port. There used to be a small fleet of scallopers that worked, you know, eastern rigs that worked out of Point Judith. That was a little bit before my time, to be honest. But the drag fleet was always substantial. I mean, I remember the port would be full. Everybody would be tied up three deep everywhere, and off the ends of the docks and everything, rafting off everybody. It seems like there must have been 3 to 4 times the amount of drag is around as there are now. Certainly seemed that way to me, you know. And of course the support services, you know, we had more boat yards. Rhode Island Engine, thank God, still around. But I mean, the shipyards and stuff, all the skill and all the labor that surrounds the fishing fleet has drifted off along with that. I think the attrition has somewhat stabilized. I think the guys that are involved now are, you know, a pretty professional bunch. I hope lobstering comes back a little bit so the guys that are still in it can be profitable again. And the same for dragging. I mean, you know, I hope so, because it's important to keep it around. It's been a great way to live, a great lifestyle. I mean, not without its problems and troubles. Most of them have been self-inflicted. But it's a way of freedom, living my life the way I want. I can use my imagination. And fishing, as far as I'm concerned, 3/4 of fishing is how to use and apply your imagination. You're going out and chasing something that nobody else on the planet sees. And then if you have the ability to be a little bit flexible on what you're doing, like you can with a small boat, and say, hey, I'm going to go out and go coal hogging today or lobster tomorrow in a skiff, or if I'm in a big boat, I can, like, I'm going to go scalloping today, or I'm going to go lobster next week, or be flexible. That's great. I mean, being outdoors obviously is great. I think it's a much healthier lifestyle than most people are living right now. Just the fact of being outdoors. When I was in college, I remember shaking my head and said, you know what? I'm not going to spend my life looking out a window. I'm just not going to do it. Can't do it. And shortly after that, I quit. I probably should have graduated, but oops, maybe someday. It's important for people to understand where the food comes from. We produce food. That's our primary business. We're extracting protein energy from the ocean in a sustainable and renewable way. You don't want Point Judith becoming condos and docominiums. What heritage do you have in a marina? It's been a hell of a good lifestyle for me. I don't think I'd have half of what I have now in freedom, or even the way I live. I don't see how I could have ever afforded to do what I've done if I had followed through on a more normal path. Maybe I'm wrong. Who the hell knows, right? But I've had fun doing this. Still am.
Okay, well, we have Mark Starr with us now. Hi, Mark. Welcome.
Hi, Joe. I just want to start by apologizing for not being here at the beginning here. I'm terribly sorry about that. I wasn't able to introduce it for you, but I sincerely apologize.
Well, we understand. And is there anything you want to say? But we do have a couple of questions, but with anything you want to say? First off, I want to say I am exhausted just watching them work. I never realized how hard, these people work. It was just amazing. But yeah. I want to hear a little bit about, I got the impression from something Mary O'Rourke said that it was probably filmed in like 2018. Do I have that right?
Yeah, this is a couple years old, I think. I've been working down there documenting the commercial fishermen for about 12 or 14 years, maybe. Yeah. I started with just plain straight photography, and then went to photography and interviews, and now switched over to videos, just trying to capture a port that's really in decline, or has been in decline for quite some time. When I started, there was a lot more vessels, a lot more people down there, but they've been under lots of pressure from various things and have been dwindling, and that's really why I wanted to try and document that particular port over a period of time in as much detail as I could.
The editing was really well done. I'm just curious, how many hours of film did you start with?
Oh boy, I don't even know. I've turned in maybe 55 to 60 films like this to the Library of Congress, and those are all just part of what I filmed down there. So it's a lot of stuff, but a lot of it is really for the future. So this is actually just a film that was made for the general public. And each one of those people have their own hour-long feature just on them that goes in much more detail. But this particular piece was really just to get people to see what goes on in a port they may pass through on their way to Block Island. So it's really just a small part of a very large project for the Library of Congress.
Have you been able to follow these people since?
Yeah, I see them quite often. Until the virus kicked in, I haven't been down there since the virus kicked in. And I was in the middle of a project on women in fishing down in Point Judith. There's been quite a big increase in women getting into the industry. And I wanted to more fully document that, but it's sort of on hold for at least a little bit. But they're still down there fishing, and I hope when things lighten up a little bit and get back to that project.
One of our questions has to do with the COVID-19. What impact has it had on the local fishing industry? I think in Rhode Island, a law has been passed to allow selling of fish on the docks.
Yeah, and that's very unusual. The only fish that could be sold to the public directly by fishermen were lobsters because they're alive. So you could sell technically any fish that was alive, but of course they're bringing in fish that have died, and they had to go through a middleman. So it's been actually kind of nice. The fishermen have always wanted something like that where they could sell directly, make more of the profit themselves. So I think that's been a great thing for them. Overall, the virus has put a damper on fishing down there, largely because a lot of their stuff goes to restaurants. So all of a sudden, these markets that had been set up, over a long period of time, all of a sudden collapsed, and there was a scramble to find other places to ship the fish to or get rid of it. So it has had an impact, and then of course some vessels have picked up COVID, their crews gotten it, so it doesn't seem to be real widespread down there, which is good, but it's affected them like it has everybody else.
I did see actually an app, and I downloaded it to my phone, but it was an app that would tell you who's selling what and where on, in the fishing industry.
Oh, really? Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. Huh.
Yeah, I could send it to you, but it's a great way to know exactly when they'll be there, on the docks and what dock and what they're selling.
Yeah.
Okay, we have another question. How have things like GPS echolocation of fish and other technologies changed the industry?
Oh, that's a very good question. They've changed it dramatically, as you might imagine. And all technology has really changed who can fish. Back in the 40s, the 50s, 60s, it was the fishermen who were good at fishing who were able to stay in fishing. As technology exploded, it meant that people who weren't all that great navigators or weren't all that great at noticing what nature did, they were able to start coming in using technology. And that was one of the big things that sort of masked the quantity of fish that were being brought in that the government had, up until a certain period, all international fishing vessels from places like Russia and things, you might have even seen them if you're old enough. Russian trawlers could come in fairly close to the United States coast. And they passed an act which pushed the coastal limits out 200 miles to other fishermen, international, from other nations, I'm sorry. And so what happened is the government said, okay, now this 200 miles out is all of our grounds, let's fish. And they started promoting fishing and giving out money to fishermen or to anybody who wanted to start fishing. And they started building big trawlers, very powerful trawlers, to take advantage of that. And corporations that had never fished got into the business. Whereas up until that period, it was really, generational fishermen on small boats. But what happened along with that, with these very big, powerful trawlers, is echolocation of fish, GPS, all these new technologies that allowed people who didn't necessarily grow up learning how to fish to fish very efficiently. And simultaneously, the government, the traditional fishermen were saying, look, there's too much fishing out there. This isn't good. We have to stop it. But the government was saying, we're watching the level of fish coming in. And as soon as that starts to decline, we're going to put a stop to it, But what happened is the electronics were allowing fishermen to catch smaller and smaller amounts of fish. Whereas they used to have to hit big schools, now they could catch smaller and smaller schools. And then all of a sudden, the graph just dropped. because now there were not even the small schools. And then the government panicked and said, oh my gosh, we don't know what happened, but all the fish are gone. We're going to buy back boats. And so all the corporations who didn't really care about fishing but took advantage of the government money said, yeah, sure, buy our boats back. There's no fish. And they left really the bag in the hands of the traditional fishermen, you know, who had been fishing for generations. So that was a clear indication where, you know, the electronics were hidden from government view because they weren't looking at that, but caused a tremendous amount of damage. So it's been coming back now that the government understands that electronics have given them an edge and stuff. But it certainly changed who was fishing. But I think it's, at least in Point Judith, it's back to the more traditional fishermen. The fishermen who have survived there today really are very good fishermen, the ones who are able to go through all these ups and downs that the industry's gone through. So it's stabilized somewhat, I think. Hopefully the attrition is going to end, and that the port can maintain some level of commercial fishing.
Are they all day fishermen?
Day boats? No, there's two sets. There's sets that typically go out for about 5-day trips, like the squid boats will often go out to George's Banks. It's a day to steam out there. They fish for 3 days or 4 days and steam back. And then there are day fishermen. So there's day lobster boats that only go out for the day, and then there's offshore lobster boats that go out for 3, 4, or 5 days or even longer. They go much further offshore, much deeper waters. And the same with all the trawlers. The little trawlers down there basically are day boats, and the bigger boats go out for longer periods. And may not even land back in Point Judith. Sometimes they'll do trips. It's very complicated the way the government has the regulations, but they may take a trip up here and land it in North Carolina. Or they may start in North Carolina and land fish up here. And today in Point Judith, they're trying to keep the harbor, the guy in charge of the harbor is trying to keep the number of vessels in the port high so that all the subsidiary industries don't disappear. So there are a lot of vessels that you'll see down there that come up from Cape May, New Jersey, or other ports up and down the Atlantic coast that may only be in Point Judith for a week or 2 weeks. Sometimes they come in just for repairs, whereas it used to be more just Point Judith boats. Today, if you look at the backs of the boats, you'll see where they're from, and a lot more of them are coming from further away.
Okay, we have another question. When a net or a line of lobster traps are lost, what kind of efforts are available to retrieve them?
The nets on the trawlers don't generally get lost. They get torn to pieces, but they've got steel cable on them. So they usually bring back everything. Now, there are fisheries that use nets that are placed in the water and left there, gill netting, for instance, and those can get lost and continue ghost fishing. So that can happen with there's a limited amount of gill netters out of Point Judith. There is some gill netting. Most of it is trawling. The lobster pots can get lost, often towed apart by draggers that hit them, or very big storms can carry them away. Those traps have clips in them that will eventually just rust and let the cage fall apart. But even that with lobsters, there's some film that's been put on by universities that show that lobsters basically are never trapped in a lobster pot. They walk in and out just like, you know, whenever they want. It's only their bad luck that they're in the trap when it's pulled up. So lobster trap ghost fishing isn't really a problem. They do fall apart, but lobsters come and go of their own free will, basically, when they're on the ground. So there is some problem with drift netting. You've got the big drift nets that are set by very large ocean vessels that don't come out of Point Judith, and they can set miles and miles of net. And if that's lost, it's pretty bad. I don't really know. I assume they go after the net as best they can. They usually have high flyer buoys on them and sometimes radio beacons to relocate them. And it's quite a bit of money, so I assume they track them down, but I don't actually know, percentage-wise what sort of nets are floating out there.
Okay, another question. Are there apprentices in place to learn the craft of net modification and repair? Are these going to be are there going to be future generations with these skills?
Yeah, that's one thing with all the skills that are associated with fishing that have declined drastically. In the past, you couldn't get a position on a boat if you couldn't mend nets. Now it's very rare to find a fisherman who knows how to mend nets, other than some very basic rudimentary things. And in terms of making new nets, basically there's no real apprenticeship. It's somebody comes in and says, "Hey, you got a job," and whether they're willing or not to teach them at that particular point. And that's been true with all the skills associated with fishing. It's been very hard lately for them to get people to go out fishing. There's no, in the past, the typical path would be you go on as a teenager on the back deck of a boat and you start learning and you work your way up and eventually you own one of the boats. And that path existed for a very long time, but that path no longer exists really. There are only a limited number of licenses available. So for young people, it's a lifestyle that's not what most people live. So you really want to have to do it. But then the idea that you're going to have your own boat is very small possibility nowadays. There are very limited licenses. So that doesn't help. And plus, people would rather be in an air-conditioned office working on a computer usually than out on a deck. But
I would imagine that those boats are pretty costly too, aren't they?
Yeah, the boats are very, very costly. I mean, to give you one example, the scallop boats, there was a small scallop boat at the end of this film that you saw, but the big scallop boats, which are very big money, and this is going back, I bet 7 or 8 years ago, it used to cost a little over $1 million to fish for 30 days. Plus you needed a $1.5 million boat. That's not something that the local family-owned fishing person can do anymore. It used to be, but now I think, and it may not even be, this again was years ago, there were only 4 dayboat scallopers out of all of Rhode Island. Most of them come out of New Bedford now. There are big scallopers out of Point Judith as well, but it tends to be more corporate that can afford the multi-million-dollar licenses required to do that.
Okay, we have another question. When I was a child, my dad became good friends with the skipper of a 70-foot dragger out of Stonington, Connecticut. He often joined Captain McLaughlin on the Maurice, and when I reached age 10, I was allowed to join them. The video mentioned keeping whiting and showed keeping lots of skate. I remember always throwing those back as trash and concentrating on fluke, butterfish, and stuff.
Yeah. The skates are all used for bait, although they do cut skate wings on the really big skates. They'll wing them, cut the wings off, and that's used as food for humans. But primarily, the skates going into Point Judith are used as lobster bait. Down here, the waters get very warm as compared to Maine, so the skate does not break down too quickly down here. Up in Maine, they'll use softer fish. Typically, they like herring, pogies, softer fish in the colder water, which will break down faster in the colder water and attract more lobsters. So most of the skate goes into lobster bait down here and would be considered trash generally by most.
Okay, the next question, I think I would ask this myself. Do you have any trouble getting folks to talk freely with you? Maybe I don't really want to know, but do the fishermen express opinions on the tourists who watch them unload, etc.? I love to watch, but I figure I'm just a pain.
No, you know what I found down in Point Judith was that they're very friendly, and actually most of them really do want to educate people who ask them questions. If you go up and you're sincere and ask questions, most of them are really pretty good. I found I was going out when I first started. I was going out to sea with them for 5-day trips, and I just walk up and say, "This is who I am. I'm trying to document what you're doing. Could I go out with you?" And without knowing who I was, whether I would trip in the gear and cut my arm off and sue them, they would just say, "Sure, we leave at midnight. Just stay out of our way." And that was the whole conversation. Mm-hmm. So they do understand that public perception is very important to what they do, and they're very proud of what they do. I think they're very well spoken. Now, you know, it's not to say you can't get somebody who's in a bad mood, but I find I've never had a problem with them, and I'm sure they make jokes about me and tourism. That's just, you know, part of the course. But they really do want to educate people. And I've talked to people who've come to Point Judith on vacations for years and got to know some of the fishermen. And when they go and meet them, they'll take them on the boat, give them tours, give them fish. I mean, you can develop some pretty nice relationships there.
Okay, we have 2 more questions. What factors caused Point Judith to become such a large harvester of squid?
Yeah, well, of course, it's just the area that squid come into. Without that, they certainly wouldn't be. Point Judith is an interesting port in that it was, well, at least in the past, it was on in the middle between the cold water fishing to the north and the warmer water fishing to the south. And so where places like New Bedford are fairly fixed in what they fish for, Point Judith was the master of changing gear and fishing styles or fishing techniques to suit what fish were going north to get into cooler water or heading south to get into warmer water as the seasons change. So they're very capable of fishing all types of fisheries, and it's not uncommon to see them switching gear throughout the year to take advantage of whatever species is passing. And with squid, it's just that there's enough squid within range of the port, I think, that they became a big squid fishing industry there. So that is their primary fish, but they do catch almost anything. I was there one year, and there was these huge blue barrels on the deck of a big dragger, and the barrels were all filled with holes, all brand new. I couldn't figure out what it was, and I asked somebody, and they were slime eel fishing. They were going to try slime eel fishing, and I guess the Asian population will eat slime eels, which when you grab a slime eel, it puts out enough slime to fill up your house. I didn't see that boat fish for it very long. They made some trial thing, and I think they decided that wasn't for them. But there was almost nothing they wouldn't try fishing for if there was a market for it.
Okay, we just have a couple of minutes left. But how much has supply from foreign competitors contributed to the reduced size of the fleet and smaller harvest?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, years ago, again, so my statistics aren't current, but a couple of years ago, it was about 92% of the fish we eat comes from other countries. So that's a huge percentage. Certainly makes a big difference. We do heavily regulate the fishing industries, and other countries may not, or may not regulate them at all. So that's a problem. There's all kinds of pressures that they face, both from government regulations, fish that are there. It's a very complicated business in terms of the government. And what happens is the government acts very slowly. So with the waters that have been warming due to global warming, the southern fish are now up here, and the fish that used to be the typical fish in Point Judith are now all the way up into Nova Scotia, trying to keep in the water temperatures that they like. So while fish that were never typically targeted here are now here, the government is not allowing them to catch them because they never had, and they're throwing all of this high value fish overboard because they're not allowed to catch it. And by the time those fish move on, the government will finally say, okay, you can catch them. And that typically is what happens. They just react so slowly.
Yeah.
So it's a very, very tough industry to stay afloat in.
Okay. Well, Mark, thank you. I mean, this has been incredibly enlightening, and I'll never look when I get on the Block Island Ferry again. I'll never look at this industry the same again. It's been really enlightening.
Yeah, well, good. That was the hope, is that people would understand a little more when they get on the ferry what they're actually seeing there.
I should say when I have the chance to get on the ferry someday.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mark. We really appreciate it and hope to see you again. And thank you, everybody. Please stay safe and hope to see you at our next event, which is August 19th. I think there was a slide there for a second, but anyway, August 19th, we'll have our fourth and final event for the year, which will be our annual meeting. That should take about 15 minutes. And then we'll be followed up by a program on a World War II artifact that was found in Quaney. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Good night and stay safe.
Great. Thank you.